The kids play a ridiculous game called Would You Rather? And I want to start with that. Would you rather live a normal life for an abnormally long time, live into your hundreds? Or would you rather live a abnormally full life for a short time? This morning our text is Proverbs chapter 3. It comes to us from a wise man, and I think he sets out principles of life to where you can have both. This wise man says, if you live by a certain set of principles, you can all but be guaranteed to have both a long and a full life. And I want to tell you about the wise man before we jump into the text. The wise man's name is Solomon. He grew up the son of a king, and so he would have had access to the greatest education in the land. He would have been trained in combat and economics and politics. He would have had all the resources at his fingertips to be a good ruler. At this time, when he's about to take over the kingdom, he would have had all that he needs to be the most intelligent and equipped person in Israel. And when he takes over the kingdom, God comes to him. And God says, as my king of my people, I will give you whatever you ask. You think about it. You ask me for something like a real life genie in the bottle situation. You ask and you can have it. And Solomon, probably feeling the weight of this responsibility to lead God's people, he says, I want wisdom. And I think God just gave him wisdom. I think God gave him a spirit of wisdom. But that's not all. It wasn't like God just opened up his head and poured it in. God put Solomon in this life situation where he was able to experience all that the world had to offer and weigh it and decide whether or not it brings happiness, whether or not it brings fulfillment, whether or not it brings wisdom. And so Solomon, and you can read about that journey, by the way, in the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon, he experiences everything this world has to offer. He has wealth, he has women, he has love, he has relationships, he has academia, everything at his fingertips. He experiences it all. And now he's this old king, and he's experienced the world, and he's the wealthiest king in Israelites' history. And he's famous for his wisdom, famous for his knowledge. People come from all over the world to hear him speak because he is so wise. And yet Solomon finds himself with a very basic need, just like you and I, and that's a child. Every parent knows the pains of trying to say to your child, I know what I'm talking about, and you don't. Listen to me. I've been there. I have wisdom that you don't have. And every parent knows that. But can you imagine being Solomon? The wisest man has literally been everywhere. There's nothing that his son could say, well, you haven't experienced this. He has the wisdom from God and life experience, and you can see it all over Proverbs. He's just like, son, hear my voice. Listen to me. Do what I'm telling you. And so he comes to his son in this chapter, and he sets out this course, these principles to live your life by in order to live a long and fulfilling life. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my teachings, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love or faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablets of your heart, so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn from evil, and it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of your produce. And then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. Heavenly Father, we bow before you and ask for your instruction. I ask for especially these seniors before me who are about to leave and go make life for themselves. I pray that you would instruct them now. And for the rest of us, I pray the same. This text is to us as much as it's to them. And so give us eyes to see and ears to hear in these next few moments. And it's in your precious name we plead. Amen. Look back up in verse 1 and 2. My son, do not forget my teachings, but let your heart... Wow, you guys were really early. I'm sorry. You should sit back down. Because you're going to be standing there for this entire sermon. I meant the final prayer. Let me give you wisdom. He says, my son, do not forget my teachings, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life, peace they will add to you. Okay, so he's got the son. He's about to leave and go and make a life for himself, just like you are. And he says to him, son, as you go, there's all kinds of voices in this world that will challenge everything you've learned, everything you believe, and everything that we've taught you here. And if you want long, healthy life, store this stuff up, memorize it, know my commandments. And he says, not only know them, but carve them on the stone tablets of your heart. In other words, make them your passion. Practice them and discipline yourself to practice them until they become who you are and how you respond to situations. Do you see the inseparable link that Solomon says about knowing the commandments of God and doing the commandments of God? So what commandments is he talking about? Well, ultimately he's talking about Proverbs 1 through 9, and as much as I think you would want me to preach 9 chapters, we'll stick with these 12 verses, and I just want to show you 3 things that Solomon says for a long, happy life. Number 1, create for yourself a reputation of love and fidelity. Listen to verses 3 and 4. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablets of your heart, and you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. So he starts by saying, create for yourself a reputation. Now, you know all about reputation. You know all about the appearance that you have before men and how that sticks with you and how you know, it's not easy to change people's perception of you. But what you don't know is that very, very shortly, what you think reputation is going to change. In a very short period of time, your concern for being cool and accepted will fade away. And I don't mean like you'll have to discipline yourself not to care about those things. I mean with just a few more years of maturity, you actually just won't care about those things. It won't even be on your radar. What will be on your radar and what will be on everybody else's radar that interacts with you, especially people that come into contractual agreements, whether it's a marriage or a business venture or a friendship with you, will be your character. People that say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me, are either just riddled with arrogance or they're lying. Sane people care about their reputation, and so should you. And in the real world, agreeing isn't really that important. You can get away with sharp disagreements and just bitter arguments if people know that you speak from the integrity of from your heart. If they know you're an honest person, if they know they can trust you. Favor comes to people who are trustworthy, not necessarily always agreeing on everything. And so the text tells you to make steadfast love and faithfulness deep-rooted convictions and passions in your life. You can't wait until a situation arises to see how you'll react. You will react poorly. You have to build the foundations of your life on being a loving, faithful person until love and fidelity is how you react. Love is selfless. It is the summary of all of the law of God. The greatest commandment in all of the scriptures is to love the Lord your God with all of your being. Hosea chapter 6 and verse 6. Listen to this. God desires love more than sacrifice. And he desires that you know God more than burnt offerings. You hear that? He wants your affections more than he wants your perfect obedience. Because it's easier to obey someone that you love. He wants you to just know him like a man knows his friends more than he wants your rigid, staunch adherence to some religious performance. This is love. Faithfulness is integrity. It's being the kind of person that stands by your promises, a person of your word. It's being called by other people trustworthy and reliable. And nothing will get you further in life than being a person of honest integrity. Money and fame and power, it's impressive, and people will flatter you with their words, but if they don't trust you, you'll have gained nothing. You'll be alone. So this wise father comes to his son and he says, adorn yourself. Collar yourself with these character traits, love and fidelity. In this culture, to have something around your neck would have meant one or two things. One, you're a slave and you're being led around. Or two, you're a dignitary and your necklace shows that. And I don't think we need to choose between the two. Enslave yourself to loving other people more than you love yourself. Become a slave to being faithful to your word. And you will find very quickly that love and fidelity are not slave masters, but exalters. The very love that you have and the faithfulness that you have will be what lifts you up in the eyes of the community and in the eyes of your God, because there are perks to doing it God's way. Great grace and pleasure is on people who are honest. Even when people disagree with you, if they know that you speak from the integrity of your heart, you will find favor. This is what makes marriages work. This is what makes business deals friendly and peaceful. This is what makes real friends stay real friends. Love and fidelity. And not only does it gain you favor with other people, but it gains you favor with God. And that's enough. I just want to stop for a minute, and I want you to wrap your mind around that concept, that God would smile on you. That the sovereign, holy, eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere at once, God, the God who created and sustains and knows by their name trillions of stars, and at the same time offers oxygen to sea creatures miles below sea level. This God, the God who rides on the clouds like a man rides a horse, with his eyes of fire and his tongue that's a sword that devours nations, that God smiles on you when he considers your love and your fidelity. And that is a life well lived. You can be the best, you can be the brightest, you can be wealthy and have all kinds of resources at your fingertips, but if people don't trust you, that's your reputation. And if God doesn't trust you, he will reject you. And in only a few short years, your children will be throwing dirt on your dead corpse and you will have wasted your life. So, create for yourself a reputation of love and fidelity. Secondly, in a world of self-confidence that questions God at every turn, you trust the Lord and question yourself. Listen to verses 5 and following. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean onto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn from evil, and it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. This is a total dependence on the Lord that causes us not to question God, but to question ourselves. And this is not a natural disposition of children, not even the children of God. How often do we live our life just making decisions without ever consulting God as if life was random? How often do we know what the Word of God says, but it's just not working in our situation, and so we just make some kind of an excuse. We trust God's forgiveness, and we do what we want because somehow the Word doesn't apply to our situation. See, you have to discipline yourself to trust the Lord because it's not a natural disposition. Every day I pick up my daughter, almost every day I pick up my daughter from school at 2:50. And when we get home, I usually just drop her off and go back to work. And her little sister, who's 4, McKinley, she is still sleeping in her nap. And so her job is to be quiet. And so I drop her off at the house and I get her a snack. And she reads a book or plays a game or watches something on the iPad. And she just needs to kind of go downstairs and eat her snack and be quiet. And the other day, I actually stayed home, and so she came back up, and she said, I want more snack. And I said, no. And she said, but I want more to eat. I'm hungry. And I said, no, we're going to eat dinner in about 2 hours, and you can wait. And she said, why? And I said, because, honey, I want you to eat good for you food. And so I just want you to wait because I know what's best for you. Usually Shaylee is the people pleaser who doesn't ever talk back. She's the good one in that way. And so I don't usually have a problem with her, but it just irritated her that she was not going to get what she wanted. And she looked at me right in the eyes and she said, you don't know what's best for me. I know what's best for me, and I want to eat. And it wasn't so much that she had an opinion. It was just the stinking arrogance of the statement. Like, you're 6 and I'm 32. What are the chances of you being right and me being wrong? No humility. No, well, I see it this way. You don't know, I know. And isn't that what we do to God? I want you to tithe. God, I can't afford that. Really, you know more about money than God. I want you to date within the covenant community of God, and I want you to wait for marriage sexually. Well, I know more about love and relationships than God. Really, the God who created you and everybody else. You've got love and relationships figured out better than him. It amazes me on a daily basis, people who choose to live a stressed out, unhappy life because they just refuse to admit that maybe, just maybe, God knows more about life than they do. My relationship, my marriage is in shambles. Okay, well, have you tried the lovingly lead, faithfully submit thing? Well, I'm not going to do that until my husband changes or until my wife changes. Oh, okay, because what you're doing's working so well. My children run amok. I can't control them. Have you tried nurturing them in the admonition of the Lord? Oh, they don't care about the things of the Lord right now. I just need to get them home by curfew. Okay. My finances are a mess. Have you tried budgeting and tithing? I have all this unexplained physical pain and health issues. Well, have you tried dieting and exercise and being healthy and laying off all the worry and the stress? You don't have to take my word for it. Talk to your doctor about the link between constant worry and stress and unexplained physical pain and heart issues. And the list could go on and on. It's like people are addicted to their own misery. But the reality is, student, you can't be trusted. You're impulsive, you're emotional, and you're very limited in your understanding of the world. For you to choose to live life your way instead of what God said is the equivalent of like a worm. Worms live about 4 years. If you don't know that about worms, they live about 4 years. So let's get ourselves an old, wise worm. He's 3.5 years old. He's blind because worms are blind. And he's lived his entire life, his 3.5 years of life, in a 6-inch radius in a crack in the ground. And one day, he comes up from the crack in the ground onto the surface and says, "Get me Warren Buffett and Donald Trump so I can educate them on the global economy." It's ridiculous that you think that you look into the Word of God and it says, do this, and you're like, I'll do it my way. So Solomon says to his son, trust, lean, rely on God. True prosperity, true help, it comes from God. God knows right from wrong. God knows the right way to the right end. He knows what will ultimately benefit you. He knows what will ultimately help you. He sees your life on a cosmic scale. And so make it your duty and your discipline to trust Him and question yourself. We don't trust in earthly fathers. We don't trust in religious traditions. We don't trust in human reasoning. We trust in the covenant-keeping God of Israel. In everything. In who you date, and where you date, and how you date, and your money, and your relationships and business ventures. All of life should be closely examined under the microscope of trusting in Yahweh. That's what it means to know God. This, in all your ways, acknowledge Him. It's not just acknowledge, like, okay, I know He's there. It is a knowledge of Him, a walking with Him, a deep, penetrating, cognitive exchange, engagement of who God is and what He expects, and a willingness to obey. And you know what? There's perks to doing it God's way. If you do this, He will make your path straight. That's not just a guiding you. That is a God who has an ordained goal for your life, and He directs you down that path. In other words, God has a wonderful plan for your life. And if you want to experience it, trust Him and not yourself. And so Solomon says, don't be wise in your own eyes. And the son's mind would have immediately raced to recent Israel's history, into the days of the judges before there were kings, when everybody did what was wise in their own eyes. Later, Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 19, will warn us of this. He says, let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and let it come that we may know it. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Trusting in your own wisdom gives you a false sense of security. So don't do it. How? Well, by fearing the Lord and turning from evil. This was the description of Job, the most righteous man in the world. Job 1:1, the most righteous man of his day, a man who feared God and turned from evil. Guys, the fear of man and what they think of you, the fear of your life situation and what could happen, the Proverbs tells us that's a snare to you, but the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And the love for evil, that is a death sentence. But there are perks to doing it God's way. Healing to your flesh. Some of your translations say navel. The literal word is the word the Arabs use for the umbilical cord. And the next is refreshment to your bones. And some of your translations accurately include the marrow of your bones. What Solomon is trying to convey to his son is that there is indeed a peace that passes understanding. There is this deep trust in God that brings wellness from the very core of who you are. There is mental and physical and emotional and spiritual rest for your soul in Christ. It's not to say that life's a happy song and everything's going to be okay. What it is that there's a trust in the Lord all the time. This is what causes David to look out and he sees his enemies and he says, my enemies are camped around me and they set themselves against me to kill me, and I trust in the Lord. This is why Paul can look at all the peril and all the danger of being the missionary he was in those days, and he says, but nothing, not sword or nothing will separate me from the unfailing love of Jesus. There is a rest in Jesus. Thirdly, tithe. You should tithe. Look at verse 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with new wine. You should tithe. You should start now. If you're not tithing, if you've never tithed before, may your graduation present to yourself be to today write your first tithe check. And I don't say that because God is needy. And I don't say that because I think you make enough money to even put a dent in the church finances. I say that because that's what the people of God do. This is what we've always done. Before I talk about that, let me just give you, there's some implications to tithing, and I'm not going to make any friends here. The first implication to being a tither is that you work for a living. We live in a culture where right now it kind of seems that the most secure way to earn a paycheck is to stay home and live off the government. And expect a handout because you have a pulse, I guess. There's no honor in that. Get a job and tithe. The second implication behind tithing is that you don't get yourself into an unhealthy amount of debt. And nothing will restrict your freedom in life and take its toll on your marriage and as financial debt. And so your gift today when you walk across the stage will be Dave Ramsey's The Graduate Survival Guide, and it stay away from credit cards and all that junk. That's another implication. You can't tithe off a deficit, right? So the other implication behind tithing is that you give when you get paid. You give to God when you get paid. Which means when a snowstorm cancels church, you make it up because you got paid. It means that when you decide to be lazy and sleep in on a Sunday morning, you make it up because God's not going to reward your unfaithfulness with more unfaithfulness. That's ridiculous. When you get paid, you tithe to the Lord. Not tithe to the poor. Jesus said you'll always have the poor. You tithe to the Lord. We should have our offerings be going to the poor and caring for the needy, but we tithe to the Lord. You give to God the way that God said to give to him, Cain. And this concept has always been true for the people of God. Long before the law of Moses was written, Jacob, who had been promised these sons, that God was going to give him this land, that God was going to raise up a nation from his offspring. And here he is. He just stole his birthright from his brother. His brother's trying to kill him, and he's got to leave the promised land. And he's about to leave to go to his uncle's house. And of course, the question on his mind is the promises null and void? Am I going to get to come back? It doesn't seem like it. And so God comes to him in a dream and assures him, you are the promised one. I will bring you back here. I will make a nation from your descendants. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And Jacob wakes up and begins to worship the Lord long before there was a law of Moses, and he gives a tenth of all of his possessions to God. Then, read Leviticus chapter 27. It's in the law. Tithe a tenth of all of your possessions. In the wisdom literatures, like what we're reading right now in Psalms and in Ecclesiastes, we are commanded to tithe. Often it's called the portion of the Most High. It's commanded in the prophets. The prophets tell us that if we refuse to, then we are robbing God. The New Testament endorses tithing. Paul, you might not know this, Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, he instructs the church at Corinth, just like he instructed the church in Galatia, to take up a collection on the first day of the week. The writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 7, reminds us of the tithe that Abraham gave to Melchizedek, and even Jesus himself says to tithe. Listen to Jesus in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 23. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin." I don't know what those things are, but it's small. Right? So they're good tithers. They're really faithful. They tithe on everything. And Jesus says, "Woe to you for doing that, because you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and love and mercy." Now listen to how Jesus says they should have acted. You ought to have done these things without neglecting the others. He doesn't say tithing. That's an Old Testament principle. He says you should have done these things without neglecting the weightier matters of the law. So in my opinion, there's no getting around this. If you are earning an income, no matter how great or how small, and you are not tithing, you are living in direct rebellion against God. This is how Christians show their trust in God. That we don't depend on our own ability to provide for ourselves. We depend on God. And so every 2 weeks, because that's how you pay me, every 2 weeks I write out my tithe check and I throw it in the plate. And it's my way of saying to God, I know who butters my bread. And there's perks to doing it God's way. This is not health and wealth. This is not invest in God. He pays dividends on the end. This is trust in a God who provides, and He always does. And He does abundantly so. And there is nobody in this entire room who could stand up and say, I am trusting in God fully the way that I should be, and God has not been good enough to me. I got to quit. But I'm not going to. I'm just saying I should. Let me end with this. What happens if you choose not to? What happens if you decide, I don't want to be loving, and I don't want to be faithful, and I don't want to tithe, and I don't want to trust the Lord? Or maybe, what if you haven't, right? Okay, you've convinced me today, I'm going to start doing these things, but I've already not. Well, you have two options. You have the angry judgment of a king. No abundant life for you. No favor with God, and maybe not with man either. No direction from God for you. No peace. No rest. No love. No delight from God in you. All that awaits the rebellion is death. Spiritual death, where your soul is separated from God here on this earth. Sometimes people don't even know they're spiritually dead. The Bible says they're just heaping up more wrath for themselves. They live like life is good, but they're spiritually dead. Physical death, where the soul and the body separate from one another. And if you die a physical death while in spiritual death, you will experience an eternal death where the soul and the physical body are separated from God for all of eternity in a real physical place called hell. And people don't like talking like that because that's uncomfortable. And Christians, when studying the deep, rich theologies of God, or lost people who are not yet Christians, who haven't bent the knee to Christ yet, they'll look at situations in this world like that poor girl in Springfield, 10 years old, kidnapped, most likely raped and left for dead in some guy's basement. And you look at things like that and you're just like, what's going on? And Christians and non-Christians alike say things like this: I don't want to have anything to do with a God who... Let me stop you and just ask you, how do you plan to finish that sentence? With a God who what? He's God. He does as he pleases. And he doesn't answer to us, and he doesn't give us an explanation, nor does he owe us one. Who do we think we are? Is that how you think Judgment Day is going to look? God gives an account of himself to you? Your arrogance will destroy you. The judgment of an angry king, hell, it's real, it's terrible, it's a reality, but it doesn't have to be your reality. Because God already knew that you would fail. God already knew that you wouldn't love the way this text tells us to love. He already knew that you wouldn't be faithful the way this text tells us to be faithful. He already knew that you would blasphemously question him and trust in your own wisdom. He already knew that you, just like Cain, would bring your tithes and offerings on your own terms. He knew. And not only did he know, but he also knew you can't make up for it now. If I kill your family and then jet out of the country before getting caught, and now I'm in Papua New Guinea, and there's all these poor people, and I kind of changed my heart a little bit, and I start serving the poor people, and for 10 years I just lived this saintly life. When I come home, I'm going to get arrested because I killed somebody, and just all the 10 years of good service didn't make up for that. And so God knew that if he was going to save unloving, unfaithful, untithing, untrusting, blasphemous, arrogant people like me, he'd just have to do it himself. And that's what he did. He came to earth in this 100% God-man named Jesus. He came just like the centuries of prophecy told us he would. From a virgin, out of Galilee and the city of David, and out of Nazareth and out of Egypt, all at the same time. He did exactly what all the prophecies say. He comes, he lives this perfectly upright life. He dies on the cross for your sin, taking your sin upon himself. And God pours out all of his angry wrath of a king onto Jesus. And Isaiah says he was happy to do it because he hates your sin that much. And then Jesus was buried for 3 days. And on the third day, he rose from the dead to proclaim that he is who he says he is, and that he can do what he says he can do, and that he can defeat your enemies of sin and death and hell and Satan, and that he can save sinners. And he left this earth with a promise that he would come back. And in the meantime, anybody who will bend the knee to this king and bow their head to this king and submit to him will be saved. And when you see that Jesus is the only way, and you see that he is your rightful king, and you bend before him, he scoops down and he says, no. Not like a servant, like a son. I want to adopt you. I want to make you part of this family. And so option number one is the angry wrath of a king, but option number two is the loving discipline of a father. Look at the last two verses. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary in his reproof. The Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father in the son in whom he delights. God either calls you enemy or he calls you child. And if he calls you child, he has poured all of his angry judgment out on Jesus, and now he only deals with you in love. I don't want that to sound too fluffy, because you still have a sin nature, you're still prone to wander. But since God has chosen to save you, he has also chosen to keep you, because there's no wrath left for you. So as a father, he has to discipline you, do whatever it takes to keep you close to himself and far away from that which brings judgment. And so he only deals with you in love, but that comes with a pretty sobering disclaimer. A relationship with God is like a relationship with a strict father, and he will inflict all kinds of pain and suffering and trials on you in order to keep you close to him and far away from judgment. That's God's good plan for you, to make you like Jesus and to get you ready for eternity. And he'll do whatever he has to do in these 70 little years that you have on this earth in order to get you ready for eternity, so that you can experience a reality that you didn't even know was possible. So be assured, in the good times and the bad, God, even in the heart-wrenching, painful times, God is lovingly, faithfully shepherding you. So don't hate that. Don't despise that. Don't shrink away from that. Consider Job. Job lost everything that he had. Job lost his children. And in chapter 5, verse 17 and 18, he says, "Behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, despise not the discipline of the Almighty." Listen to this. "For he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal." C.S. Lewis said, "God whispers to us in our pleasure, he speaks to us in our conscience, and he shouts to us in our pain." And this shouldn't surprise us, because this is how God expects us to parent our children here on this earth. This is going to be really awkward because they're all here, and I had no idea. I did not plan this. But a couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to go to the Klingenberg's house for lunch, and I'm looking, as you go down their stairs, they got all their kids and grandkids there on the wall, and they're telling me everybody what they do. And I sitting there with Bob, and I said, so you're telling me that every one of your kids and grandkids love the Lord and serve him in some capacity? And he says, "Yep." And I said, "What's your secret?" And he said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." That's good advice. I have a father who, he doesn't walk on water, but there's a possibility he could. And as much as any human, non-divine being could, he has modeled for me Jesus. And I can tell you that I cannot remember one time in all of my life where Dad disciplined me out of anger, where he just flew off the handle, started throwing things around, yelling and he wasn't like that. He'd send me to my room. He'd probably cool off himself. He'd come in, he'd explain to me, "Son, you're getting a spanking, and here's why." He'd spank me, leave so I could cool off. Then he'd come back in, and I would have to articulate with my words why I got a spanking. And then we would pray together. We would ask for the Lord's forgiveness. And then I would have to go and ask for my teacher's forgiveness. Those were the days when teachers were right and kids were wrong. You don't know anything about that, but those days existed. And so I'd have to go apologize to my teacher, to my mother, or whoever I had offended. And I respect him for that, because I can never remember a time when hammers flying all over the garage. Holy men don't deal with their kids in anger. They deal with them in love. So don't make the mistake when God is disciplining you to confuse it for judgment. He's not up there yelling, screaming, all ticked off at you. He's keeping you for himself. I don't have time, but if I did, I would read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11, and I hope you'll go home and read that. the writer of Hebrews actually quotes this proverb and expounds on why God corrects us. But ultimately, this is how God keeps his children. This is how he gets us to memorize and obey his commandments. This is how he makes us loving people. This is how he makes us faithful people. This is how he causes us to trust in God and not ourselves. This is how he causes us to fear God and turn from evil and keep us tithing and all these things we talked about today. He does it through loving, fatherly discipline. C.S. Lewis, once again, likened it to an artist who, every great artist has done little paintings they don't really care about to like muse a child. It'll later be discarded. It doesn't have to be great. But that same great artist, when creating a painting that will hang in the walls in the hall of the palace for the king, every stroke must be perfect. He'll start over as many times as he needs to. He'll erase, but it will be perfect. This is your Father in heaven who is lovingly readying you to live with him for eternity. So are you a child or are you an enemy? Are you a painting that is simply to amuse a child? Or are you a painting that will be a masterpiece in heaven for eternity? We're about to walk across the stage and celebrate that you've graduated from high school, but if you're not a child of the Lord, don't leave here today without talking to me. And if you are you storing up God's commands, making them the etchings on your heart? Are you known for your love and your faithfulness to your word? Are you trusting the Lord by living according to his word and not your own wisdom? Are you tithing? It could be that today, whether God is calling you for the first time or whether he is in the busyness of graduation time and choosing colleges and filling out paperwork and going to parties, reminding you of some things that you've left behind. Either way, I want to caution you. How are you dealing with the discipline of the Father right now? How will you recognize and respond to the discipline of your loving Father? Don't fall into the judgment of an angry king. These are words of wisdom for your life. He who has an ear, let him hear.